Afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another exciting edition of Torah Study with Rabbi P. We are here in Long Beach, California. Beautiful day here in Southern California with my beloved crew here. Come on, give a shout out. There you go. You see, you got to be excited to study Torah, right? You can't come into Torah study lethargic or anxious. You want to be excited. You want to be enthusiastic. You want to be passionate. That's the way the Torah was given to us, and that's the way we want to study, right? With passion and enthusiasm. All right. So we're going to get to a subject that's very enthusiastic, and Jews are passionate and excited about this, Yom Kippur. I know everyone looks forward to that holiday. It's almost on par with Purim, right? Almost on par with Purim. Where Purim we're excited, and we with the graggers and booing Haman, and on Yom Kippur we're also excited, right? Yeah. Now, why do I mention Yom Kippur? Because the portion that we're reading today starts with the story of Yom Kippur. We know that Yom Kippur comes out on the 10th day of the month of Tishrei every year. Why that particular day was chosen as Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement? So we've gone through our weekly Torah sessions. We've talked about how the Jews worshiped the golden calf. Moses had to spend some time reconciling with God, for the people. And finally, the ultimate atonement came on the 10th day of Tishrei. That's when Moses came down with the second set of tablets to the Jews and said, Salachti kidvarecha, I will forgive them according to your wishes, to your words. And that became that day symbolized forever. That is the Day of Atonement for the Jewish people. And now, what do we do on Yom Kippur? We all gather to Shul together, even if you're not really even a Shul goer, but many Jews here in America are, at least if they're a 1 day, a 2 day, a 3 day. Yom Kippur is that 1 day that they show up because they promised their mothers that they would. So they come to Shul on Yom Kippur, maybe not the whole day, maybe a half a day, maybe like a quarter of the day, maybe for half a sermon, whatever it is. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. But they do come to on Yom Kippur. And it is the most important day of the Jewish calendar we can say. Okay, what happens on Yom Kippur? We fast. We fast. We don't eat. We don't drink. We don't wear leather shoes. We refrain from anything that's pleasurable. On Yom Kippur, in order for us to be able to attain this idea of atonement. Because during the year, we live lives ups and downs and ups and downs. Some days we're better, some days we're worse, some days we're more cognizant, some days we're less cognizant. Some days we try to perform X amount of good deeds. Some days we perform X amount of bad deeds. It just matters, everybody. And all of this is because we're human. If we wouldn't be human, angels don't need a day of atonement on Yom Kippur. We need a day of atonement because there's always going to be things that we say, we do, we think, that's going to somehow transgress on one of the mitzvahs of the Torah. And hopefully after that day, you feel, rejuvenated. You feel clean and cleansed of everything. We start the year off strong. Great. Now, back in biblical times, Yom Kippur was very different because Yom Kippur was, even though it was a day of affliction, it was a day of affliction, but it was not a day that was spent all day in Shul. It was not. The main part that we know about Yom Kippur was given to us in this section, and that the main source of atonement that day was, besides everyone feeling guilty and bad and doing whatever you had to do, was the service of the high priest. That was the focal point of where people would focus their attention, meaning that he had certain services that only he could accomplish that day, and everything had to be done in a certain order. Now, and that's mentioned here in the portion of Achrei Mos. It starts off that God spoke to Moses after the death of Aaron's 2 sons. We remember that tragedy from a few weeks ago, where they brought an incense that they were not commanded to, and God, punished them by death. And then Moses said, "Look, we got to finish what we have to do." And then later on, Moses said, "You know what? I'm going to tell you what happens here in the Holy of Holies." So in the sanctuary, and subsequently in the temple, there was one room that was called the Kodesh HaKadoshim. It was called the Holy of Holies. It was separated by a curtain, by a wall, that you could not enter into there except once a year. And that once a year was only allowed by one person was able to go in there, and that was the high priest, the Kohen Gadol. No one else was allowed ever to enter into the Holy of Holies. What was in the Holy of Holies? The Ark. And in the Ark was a Torah, the remnants of the Moses' smashed tablets, the second set of tablets, Torah. There was a little jar of the man was there, and then there was on top of the ark was the cherubim. There were these angels with children's faces with wings on them, and that was it. That was the only thing that was there in the Holy of Holies. Okay, and no one was allowed in. Punishment for going in was you ever see the gong show? Ding, you're out. Okay.
How would they have known what a cherubim looked like?
Moses would explain to them. Moses got the commandment from God that this is exactly what I want you to put on the ark, because it's an anomaly, because God tells us before and doesn't want any images made, in Israel. But here he says on the ark you're allowed to put these images of young children with wings like representing angels, and it was miraculous. I mean, we're talking about this miraculous that when the Jews fulfilled God's will and they were in good stead, they faced each other. The angels, the children faced each other, and the wings would cover things. If not, they would turn away. So it was a spiritual place, very spiritual place. This Holy of Holies. Now, what are we going to do in the Holy of Holies? So Moses sits down with Aaron and he says, "Listen, this is what you have to do. This is not going to be easy, but I want you to pay attention to what's going to happen, because a very, very difficult day for him. Number one is you're going to bring the morning sacrifice." Meaning, got to get dressed in the eight vestments he wore. The high priest every day wore 8 vestments. We read about them beforehand when we made them. He wore a breastplate, he wore a tunic, he wore an undershirt, and then another shirt, and then he had a diadem, which is called a tzitz, that was on top of his head, that was made out of. Then he wore a turban, and then he had pants, and he had 8 vestments that the high priest had to wear every day. So when he starts off his service, he has to wear these 8 vestments. Now, every time the priest did a service, he had to go to the mikveh. Now, here's the kicker. A mikveh, everybody's familiar with what a mikveh is. It's a ritualarium. It's a Jewish, spiritual bath. This is normally Yom Kippur comes out when? What part of the year? Fall. Anybody been to Jerusalem in the fall? Yeah. What's the weather like? Cold, okay? This is before they had any, heating equipment. So the mikveh that they had prepared for the high priest is freezing. Okay, they had to come up with a solution. So they used to heat up these metal bars and put them in there before the Kohen went in there, just to kind of take away some of the cold. It's kind of warm. It wasn't warm, but at least it wasn't freezing cold, because he's going to have to go to the mikveh 5 times that day. And I'll explain to you why. So then Moses tells him, you'll bring the sacrifice, then you'll bring also atonement sacrifices. Meaning, you're going to bring like a goat, and you're going to bring a bull, and you're going to bring this. One sacrifice is going to be an atonement for you. Another one is going to be for you and the priests. Another one is going to be for you, for the Jewish people. Okay, fine. And you have to slaughter them. You have to drain the blood and all of that stuff. Then, you're going to go into the Holy of Holies. You go into the Holy of Holies, you're going to have to change clothing. You have to go he takes off his 8 vestments, and he puts on 4 simple pieces of thing with called pishtei lovan, only made out of flax, very simple, whatever it was, wool, whatever it was, simple, whatever the priests were wearing, the regular priests, he put those on. Very, very plain. Okay. With those plain clothes, he used to go into the Holy of Holies. The question is why? Why can't he go in with his regular vestments? And here's an interesting idea. There's an old expression in the Talmud, Ein kateger nasa saneiger. Okay? What does that mean? Let me continue. You know what that means? Ein kateger nasa saneiger. It means like this. It means this. A prosecutor cannot become a defense attorney. If you're a prosecutor, you're a prosecutor. You can't become an offense. So what does it have to do with the high priest on Yom Kippur? Now, the vestments that the high priest normally wore on every day was made out of a number of different strands, of thread. One of the threads that he wore was gold. Okay? Now, gold was what? Once upon a time, gold was a prosecutor. When was it a prosecutor? By the golden calf. So gold has in itself the element of a prosecuting attorney. Now he was there to prosecute. Look what the Jews did. You gave them gold, and look what they did with the gold. So you could not come into the room where you're going to plead for forgiveness dressed in gold. So he had to take off his vestments that had gold in them and put on the linen vestments. I said flags, I meant linen vestments that he wore, and therefore he could go into the Holy of Holies. Now, what does he go in with? So he had to go in with some of the blood from the sacrifices that he did in this little bowl, okay? Then he had to bring in incense. He had to bring in a pan with fire on it, and some of the incense that he crushed during the day. The incense was made of all different aromatic spices, and he had to bring them in there. Now this was a most difficult job that he had to do, because he came in carrying three things in two hands. He had the blood here, and he had the incense and the fire. And when he went into the Holy of Holies, he had to somehow manage to get the incense on the fire while holding the blood. This was very, so he practiced. So 7 days before Yom Kippur, the high priest went into what we call practice mode. They went over with him and over with him and over with him, and he practiced and he did and then back and forth. They studied and they studied all the laws, so he knew exactly which order everything had to be done. And so he goes in there. Then he takes the incense. He leaves the incense pan in the Holy of Holies. He sprinkles the blood against the thing, goes out. Okay, takes off his vestments. Every time he took off his vestments and changed clothing, he had to go to the mikveh. So he went to the mikveh first in the morning, then before he put on the linens he had to cut. Now he's putting on gold again. Boom, he goes again to the mikveh. He puts on the gold. He does another service. He picks 2 cows. One goes to the sacrifice. One is going to go Lazazel. There was going to be a service that they were going to take one of the goats, and they were going to bring it up to the mountain, and they're going to push it off the mountain, and the mountain, it's going to die on the mountain. That was called Lazazel. The mountain was called. So if you tell someone in Hebrew, Lech Lazazel, it's not a compliment. Okay? It is not a compliment. It means go to hell. Okay? So do not say that to an Israeli. You could say say something else, but don't say that to an Israeli, because that's not a good one. So then he does that. He does a few of the other things, sprinkle some more blood, but now he's got to retrieve the fire pan. Can't leave the fire pan in there. So what does he have to do now? Change clothing. Thank you. Changes clothing. Puts on the linen clothing. Goes to the mikveh. Puts on the linen clothing. And then while all this is happening, the Sanhedrin is there. The rabbis were standing around, just making sure that the order is correct. Because if you mess up the order, the whole service is done. Then he goes in, collects the fire pan, he goes out. Now, it was interesting that one of the vestments that he wore inside had like these little bells to them, and he also had a rope that was attached to his leg. And the rope extended outside of the Holy of Holies. The little bells, they say, were there, so you heard him moving around, and so you knew that he was still. The rope was, if God forbid you didn't hear the bells, what does that mean? You heard one clop, then you knew, and no bell. Oh, okay, so what they did with the rope, they couldn't go in to retrieve him, because you can't go into the Holy of Holies. So they schlepped him out, with the rope. Now, interestingly, there's a sidebar. The first temple was, according to the Talmud's calculations, was around for 410 years. The second temple was around for 420 years. We have on record that during the first temple period, that means the temple period where was built by Solomon up to the destruction, there were only 8 high priests in 420 years. Think about it. So the average high priest served how long? About 50 years, right? About 50 years. That was basically, they went in year after year after year. The second temple era, for the 420 years, we have about 300 high priests. They never made it more than a year, most of them. What was the difference? The difference was during the first temple period, we had high priests that were sincere. They were religious people. The second temple period, you had high priests that bought their position. They bought it. Because the second temple era, a part of it was run by the Romans, a part of it a part of it was run by the Sadducees, different periods of time, and they bought themselves this position. Now, if you bought yourself this position, Yeah, come on. You're not sincere of going in and doing a real service, so most of them didn't make it. Didn't make it through the Yom Kippur. Why anybody would want to try it knowing that your chances of making it through the Yom Kippur service are very small, but I guess it's just the prestige of being known as a high priest was enough for them to go. Anyways, so he retrieves the incense pan, he leaves. He has still a service that he has to finish with the sacrifice for the afternoon, other atonement sacrifices and burning some other this. So what does he have to do? Change clothing. Go mikveh, back to the 8 vestments. So 5 times he went in and out and in and out and in and out, of the mikveh, changing clothing and all of that stuff. And that was at the end when he finished the Yom Kippur service. And he was successful. They threw a big party for him, and it was great. And we, I'll give you 1 second. And if you look in I'm not sure the machzor that your temples use, but in our shul we go through a whole avoda. There's a part of the afternoon service on Yom Kippur that goes through this entire thing, literally step by step by step. It's about 40, 50 pages long, and for Orthodox shuls that are serious, they read the whole thing, page after page after page, what the Kohen Gadol did, when he did it, what he did, how he did it, how he flipped the blood, where the blood was spilled, and all of that stuff, which sacrifices were meant to go here, which sacrifices were meant to go there. And then at the end of the day, B'tzeisei, if he came out there and he was successful, everybody screamed, everybody did a big party, Baruch Hashem, he was successful, because don't forget that there were many sins that were atoned for just by the service of the high priest. Go ahead, Heidi.
Weren't they fasting all this time?
Yes, they were. Yes.
Everybody
was fasting during this time because he needs to everybody was fasting, including the high priest. But even before then, he didn't sleep the night before. They wouldn't let him sleep the night before because who knows what's going to happen. He may oversleep today. So they kept him up to talking to him and teaching him, and he was teaching them, and they were going, back and forth and back and forth. So he was up the whole night of Erev Yom Kippur, the night of Yom Kippur. They didn't let him eat much because you eat a lot of food, you're sluggish, you're this. So they wouldn't let him eat much. So the Erev Yom Kippur, unlike us, who eat about 7 to 10 meals, on the eve of Yom Kippur, depending upon which faction of Hasidism you belong to. So, we like to do 9 because we're Chabad. So there's 9 meals eaten during that day. So you come into Kol Nidre, you're like bloated and why did I eat that last pepperoni? Okay? Now, I meant kosher pepperoni, by the way, only kosher, okay? You don't think non-kosher before Yom Kippur, you're kidding? That? So he hardly, and then he had to practice, and this was all hard work. Don't get me, none of this was easy work, getting and grinding, going and doing that. Everything had to be done, and the whole time he had to be thinking in his head that I'm doing this not for my self-aggrandizement, I'm not going to become the high priest. He was doing this simply because he was the messenger, he was the agent, he was the shliach for the Jewish people. And when he came out, a big yontif. It was a major holiday that he came out and he was successful, and boom. Now, I'm exhausted talking about it. I mean, just going over the rules and regulations, I'm exhausted. Imagine what he had to do. But afterwards, he got to rest a little bit. The day after, they fed him, and they did it, and all of that stuff. So that's what Moses is telling him, in this portion, and make sure that nobody, it's your responsibility, Aaron, that nobody goes into this room except for you on that particular day. And on that particular day, this is what you have to do, A, B, C, D, all the way to Z. 26 steps, and make sure you do it all in the correct order, not to forget. Now, if he didn't know the order, because as I mentioned during the Second Temple era, specifically guys who bought their positions didn't know, so the rabbis were there instructing him, okay, like a cheat sheet. You have A, B, and woe to us if we had to rely on such a Kohen Gadol, the guy who you had to teach. It said the night before, it was interesting, the night before, what would they do? The Kohen Gadol, I'd mentioned, the high priest would be engaged in discussion, Torah discussion. Now, if he was a scholar, which you hoped, he would be the one that would be teaching and he would be reading from the Torah. If he wasn't, they would teach him, how to read and what to say. And woe to us if we have such a Kohen Gadol, a high priest who couldn't even read the Torah. I mean, I'm not talking about with that we read today with the vows, but even without the vows, it was such a high priest. But times being as they were, this was what we had, and that's the way it is. That's the way it is. So that takes up the first section of our parsha. You'll read it on Shabbos. You'll read how each thing was done by the high priest in a certain order, with this close and that close, and then of course it tells us that on this day that it's a very holy day. Like if you're following along, page 644, I'm reading from now, verse number 31, chapter number 16, and verse 31 says, "It is the Sabbath of complete rest for you, and you shall afflict yourself," which means, what does affliction mean? Affliction means no eating, no drinking, no anointing, no washing, no wearing leather shoes, but you can wear a leather belt. Everybody asks me that, no problem with a leather belt, with no intimacy the night before. I mean, this is for everybody. This is not only for the high priest, this was for everybody that had to do this, but especially an eternal decree, and the Kohen who was anointed, there's certain place that he should go in this and do all of these things once a year. That's it. So there were some sins that we did, like for example, that you could get forgiveness immediately. Let's say you forgot to make a blessing on the banana that you just ate. It's a mitzvah to make a blessing on a banana. You did make the blessing. You said, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't make a blessing. From now on, I'll remember to make a blessing, and I feel really bad about it." But then you're forgiven. Okay? But there's one criteria, one caveat. You got to be sincere. I mean, if you're just going, "I don't care if I didn't make," "Oh, but I'm so sorry, so sorry." I've always given the example of when your children were fighting and you separated them, and who started it? It was always the oldest one got blamed, and you tell the older one to say sorry to the younger one, and he never means it. Okay? He says sorry, and then he'll say sorry, but he'll never mean it. Okay? And as a matter of fact, if you say to him, "Oh, do you mean it?" "Yeah, of course I mean it. Of course I mean it." "No." "Do we mean it?" "Yes." "No." Like all of that stuff. So, but you have to be sincere when you make atonement. Go ahead. I'm so sorry.
Yes, Rabbi, this verse, as far as is the Sabbath of complete rest for you?
Yeah.
Shabbat, Shabbaton,
Yeah.
Lachem. How can it be? Is this differentiated from other Sabbaths?
Yes,
Or
much different. It's a Shabbat Shabbaton means that on a regular Sabbath you cannot fast. You may not fast. Meaning, if let's say one of the fast days, Tisha B'Av, comes on the Sabbath, you're not fasting. You push that away. If you have the 10th of Tavis, you push it away. The only day that you fast is on Yom Kippur if it falls out on Shabbos, because Shabbos is a day of enjoyment. It's a day where we eat, we rejoice, we're thrilled in our delights. This is a Shabbat Shabbaton. This Shabbos supersedes the other Shabbos for the Inisim es Nashrisechem, for the affliction that goes later on in the verse. That's the difference between this Yom Kippur and a regular Shabbat. But all the work that's prohibited on Shabbat is prohibited on Yom Kippur as well. There's no cooking, there's no this, and there's nothing of that. So there's other sins that we do that take a little bit more. Like you have to, if you did a sin against someone else, let's say you injured Marcy for some, why you would do it, I don't know. But let's say by mistake, then you have to make you have to appease her. Nothing is going to help you. You come to God on Yom Kippur and you say, "Please forgive me." He said, "What do you want from me? You didn't do it to me. You did it to Marcy. Go ask forgiveness." And so there's many sins that for various levels of atonement takes various different things that you have to do. Some sins only get expiated on Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur comes and you wipe out some sins. Some sins tag along with you forever until you die. I mean, you can't really. You could try, like murder, for example. Murder. If you murdered somebody, there's nothing you can really do. I mean, to get you atonement because you killed somebody. We murdered somebody. So that's something that, your death is going to be the final arbiter for total forgiveness. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't ask forgiveness. You need to live a life now of complete, holiness and all of that. But ultimately, you'll only be completely forgiven when you pass away. But I wouldn't worry about it. Just live a good life. Okay? Just live a good life. Make sure you don't bother anybody. Make sure you don't hurt anybody. Make sure you don't insult anybody. The best thing to do is don't talk. Take a vow of silence. As I told you about that fellow that joined that joined this convent. He was overcome with spiritual ecstasy, and he wanted to do something, so he joined this convent. This convent was made up. This was like a monastery. He joined a monastery. Monastery that had a very strict rules. You could only say 2 words every 10 years. Can you imagine that? No Jew would do that, okay? But this guy did it. You had to do 2 words in 10 years, okay? So he's there for 10 years. The 10 years are up. They say, what are your 2 words? Food, cold. That was his 2 words for 10 years. 10 more years go by. They ask him, what are your 2 words? Bed, hard. Okay, fine. Another 10 years. So he's in there for 30 years. So the bosses, whatever they call them, the administration, are sitting there. After 30 years, he gets another 2 words. He says, I quit. Okay? So one guy turns to the other guy and says, don't worry about him. He was always a complainer. Okay? All right? He was always a complainer. So you know what? I don't even know why I mentioned this, but whatever it is, I don't know. That's the way my crazy mind works, and that's the way you get with. You
use the word murder.
Yes.
You're talking about the premeditated murder, not killing on a battlefield.
That's exactly correct. Because there are. I use the word specifically murder because murder is prohibited. Killing is sometimes permitted. If you're in a war, for example, there's capital punishment. All of that's permitted. Killing, murder is. But it also not only premeditated, but there's also shoygig, unintentional murder, which you have to do atonement for. You have to go to the city of refuge. So there's a whole line. If you can read in the tractate of Yuma, in the tractate of Yom Kippur, in the Talmud tells you what to do, and also the Arizal, one of the great Kabbalists, has also a series of what you have to do to get forgiveness. Like now. For many of the things that we did, we brought sacrifices. Now there's no sacrifices. So if you transgressed on something, you should do prayer and confession, charity. Those are the things. Fasting. Those are the things that get you forgiven. And that's enough for forgiveness. Let's go into something happier. Okay. Happier. So then once we're talking about sacrifices, Hashem goes and says, listen, you know what? I know that you're going to bring sacrifices in Israel. I want you to bring it when the temple comes, only to the temple. I don't want everybody to have their own private, altars. You'll bring them to where I live. And where do I live? In Jerusalem, on the Temple Mount, with the temple. And that's where I want you to bring all of your holiday sacrifices and all of those things, etc., etc. And it goes on to there. Okay. Now, the last part of this is all about sexual relationships and who you could marry, who you can't marry. I mean, you can't marry your mother, you can't marry your mother-in-law, you can't do this, you can't do that. All different rules and regulations. Who you could have relationship with, who you can't have relationship. You can't marry your aunt, you can't marry your sister-in-law. If you're 2 sisters, you can't marry together. Even though, don't forget, in the olden days, in biblical times, the polygamy was okay, but you couldn't marry 2 sisters. Because there's too much competition, and even if you divorced a sister, you couldn't marry the other sister. As long as one sister was alive, you couldn't marry the other sister. So you can't do that. You can't marry your grandmother or your granddaughter or your daughter or all of these things, your daughter-in-law, etc., etc., etc. I mean, it's just a bunch of rules and regulations that who you could and who you can't have relationships with. Thank God, we're okay with that today, and then it goes on. Then, lucky for us, it is a sect. There's 2 portions this week. Okay, not only is there the portion of Achrei Mot, there's the portion of Kedoshim. So if you go to Shul on Shabbos, if you come to Shul, we're going to read 2 sections like we did last week. Why do we have 2 sections on one Shabbos? We have to finish by Simchas Torah. Okay, we have to finish. And if you had each one individually, you would not be able to do that. So the rabbis years ago put together two sections. Certain sections go together, and this week is one of those 2 sections. Achrei Mot goes together with Kedoshim, and Kedoshim is one of those fundamental sections that there are literally tens and tens and scores of rules and regulations. The entire section is just given for rules and regulations. But what's interesting is it's called Kedoshim. It's called Kedoshim. The word Kedoshim is holy. Now he says, in the section, Kedoshim Tiyu, you shall be holy. Now why shall we be holy? And he adds, Ki Kodesh Ani, because I am holy. And there's a concept of imitating God. What do we want to do? How do we want to imitate God? So we believe that God has all of the positive attributes and none of the negative attributes that we have. It means that God is merciful, God is compassionate, God is wise, God is forgiving. So all of those things we want to imitate. So if you want to be holy, and what is holy? Holy is the opposite of natural. See, naturally we're just people we do whatever we do, we're ups and downs, we live lives of vicissitudes, back and forth. Sometimes we're good, sometimes we're not. Holy is separate. Separate means we go out of our natural state of being. We're in a different state. Because to really achieve the level of holiness where God expects us to do, we really have to work hard on ourselves. If you're petty, if you're jealous, if you're stubborn, if you're angry, all of these things, these are attributes that don't allow you to achieve the level of holiness. And if you want to be holy, if you truly want to connect with the Almighty on a level that is way, way past what you naturally are, it's going to take work. It has to take work. As a matter of fact, what we study now in the Hasidic world is we study a book called the Tanya. The Tanya is a work of the Alter Rebbe, the first Chabad Rebbe, wrote just in order for you to achieve a level of holiness. Doesn't call it that, but he said it's a level of where you achieve a level of where the best that you can be. And what means the best that you can be? On a spiritual level. That means not talking about the best pitcher you can be, or the best pianist that you can be. We're talking about the best spiritual person that you can be. But it's difficult because we have half of our heart has this ingrown drive that we call the nefesh habahamis, the animalistic soul, where we say, I love that, what is called, pocketbook, or what Sylvia has in front of her. Say, that's so nice. I'm going to figure out a way how I'm going to get it away from her. I'm so petty. That's not. You can't be holy if you're like that. You can't be holy if you hold on to grudges. You can't be holy if you're petty. You can't be holy if you take revenge, or if you give bad advice to people. You have to be holy, and it's a constant struggle. It's a constant everyday struggle when we wake up in the morning, not to be the one that's going to fall prey to our selfish gene. That everything is about us, everything is about me. That if I don't find a parking spot right away in the JCC, I start, I'm mad. Where's the parking lot for the rabbi? Why didn't I clear it? So I call immediately the tow company. And I say, hey, towing, come here to the JCC. The rabbi needs a spot. Which car? 6. Take the first 6 cars and tow them out, because I like to park lengthwise. I'm not such a good parker. I need 6 spots. So these things, how can you be holy? If you do this, so you have to work on yourself. So I'm just going to share with you. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Lynn.
What about thoughts?
Very important.
Think and not.
It's not as bad as actually saying what you're thinking, but thinking does have an effect in the world. Thinking has an effect in the world. The Baal Shem Tov argued with his students, because one guy said to another guy, you know what, I'm so mad I can rip you to pieces like a fish. So the Baal Shem Tov then said, I want everybody to come closer, put your hands on each other's shoulder, and they had what they called this a spiritual elevation, where they literally saw a vision of this guy ripping a guy apart like a fish. And he said, even though it didn't happen in the physical world, but it did happen in the spiritual world. So when you say something, when I say to you, I'm going to kill you, even though you're not going to kill them, of course you're not going to kill them, but in the spiritual realms it has an effect, and thoughts also have an effect. But it's a job, it's an adventure, it's an experience that takes a lot of work, because our job is to come to the conclusion that we are completely bottled, nullified, and subservient to the Almighty. Do we feel that way? How many people walk around feeling this ultimate sense of complete servitude to God every second of the day? Not just on Yom Kippur, we're all sitting in Shul and the rabbi gives this bellowing, bombastic, sermon, and and you're inspired and you're ready to go out there, and then all of a sudden 4 o'clock comes and you're starving and you think to yourself, what did the rabbi say? What did he say? Okay, so here is the Alter Rebbe gives ideas on meditations, that these meditations will help us gain this kind of traction where we are going to be able to say to ourselves, you know what, I am here for a purpose, and one of those purposes is to fulfill God's will. How do I fulfill God's will? Through the mitzvahs. And when I do a mitzvah, I do a commandment in the Torah, I bring down from heaven a blessing upon myself that I am able to fulfill this idea of complete servitude to God. And I do it not because I'm forced to. Okay, you have to have awe and fear of God, but you also have to have love of God. And I want to do this mitzvah. I want to put on my tefillin in the morning, and I want to feel this incredible sense of spirituality that I'm putting on the tefillin. I'm connecting with you, God, now, and I have no other desire. I don't care about anything else, whatever it is in the world, the market, sports, politics, agriculture, weather, nothing matters. Only what matters is my connection with you, and I'm completely subservient to you right now while I'm putting on my tefillin, while I'm lighting Shabbos candles, while I'm giving charity, while I'm shaking the lulav, while I'm eating the matzah. But it's hard because in our minds we have so many things that are going on. So the Alter Rebbe writes about certain meditations that you should be thinking about prior to doing the mitzvah. And today he writes such an incredible meditation, There is a verse in the Torah that says, "Kamayim l'yom chasim," like water covers over the sea. Now, what panim, and if you look at the water, what do you see? A reflection, your own reflection, right? When you look at the water, have you ever looked into a pond and seen someone else's reflection? When you were doing heavy drugs, that's when, if you were doing some heavy duty drugs, then you see someone else's reflection. But if you're just sitting there on the water and you're looking at the water, what do you see? The reflection. Now, think about this. What kind of a reflection do you see? The very same thing that's going on your face. Whatever your face is showing, that's what's reflecting in the water. So if you're smiling, what do you see? If you show a mean face, what do you see? A mean face. If you show like a funny face, you see a funny face. The Alter Rebbe writes, the same is true about two people, right? If you show a good face to someone else, they're generally going to respond with a happy face. If you say Shalom Aleichem, good Shabbos, like a Shabbat Shalom with enthusiasm, what kind of reaction are you going to get? Enthusiasm. If you see people and you go, nice to see you, Dave. Okay, he's falling asleep. Nice to see you, Dave. He's okay. If you show an angry, you're going to see an angry. Okay, that's what face reflections are for. Like they're mirrors, right? Same thing is true with the Almighty. If you think to yourself, think about this for a second, just for a second, that God in heaven wants to show you the greatest. He loves you so much, and He shows you this wonderful countenance. And He gives an example of a king. Now, the problem with the Alter Rebbe writes about a king. This is in the late 1700s when there were real kings. Today, kings are schmings. They're nothing. They're good for going to funerals, standing up there. They get dressed in fancy clothing. Commercial. And it said kings are not really. There's no such thing like a czar today. The czar had absolute power. When he wanted to kill you, you were dead, finished. Today, the kings do nothing. So So what happens? Imagine if the king, who's a real king and has power over the country, shows you some additional attention that you would not expect. Meaning you're just a regular guy. You're one of 100 million people in the king's realm. But the king chooses you, and his whole retinue, the Alter Rebbe writes, his whole retinue is traveling, and you're sitting at the side of the road, and he gets out of his coach, and he goes to you, and he brings you into his coach. And and he sits you down next to him, and he drives you to the capital city, invites you into his dining room, and only dines with you and him together. Imagine that. He dines with you and him together, and then says, hey, you know what? You hang out with me as much as you like. What kind of feeling would you have to the king? Your head would explode, right? Your head would explode. You wouldn't know what to do. You would be feeling such a tremendous amount of love and reverence to the king because he's showing you this extra amount of caring and love and all of this. And and the Alter Rebbe says, but this is a physical king, so who cares about this guy? But think about God, who does exactly the same thing, that chooses you from the 8 billion people to have a certain destiny, a unique destiny, and he loves you and cares for you and worries about you and all of that stuff. How should you respond to him? Through love and reverence and all that, and joy and smiling and enthusiasm and all of that thing. But this is something you have to think about before you do the mitzvah. And if you do the mitzvah, then Kaddish, then we become holy. But it's not easy. It takes a lot of time and effort and willing to go through this and everything. So, you know what? We try our best. We try our best. And I'm going to finish with one little thought, and then we're going to go, because it's 1:45, it's going to be a few minutes from now, and then if anybody has any questions concerning anything else, you may answer, because I'll be leaving. Okay. All right. Because I know the hard questions. I don't want to, I'm going to say goodbye. You could ask some other rabbi. Then the next verse goes like this. Ish imay v'aviv tiro. A man, like Rashi says, he uses the word man, but he means everybody. Imay v'aviv tiro should fear his father. Reverse, scratch that. A man should fear his mother and his father. Ish, a man, imay, his mother, v'aviv, and his father tiro, he should fear. V'shabshaisei tishmoiru, and keep my Sabbaths. Ani avayish, ani Hashem Elokeichem, I am God, your God. Small little verse which tells you and reiterates 2 laws which we've already had, both of them in the 10 Commandments, and says that a man must fear his mother and his father, and he should keep Sabbath, because I am God, your God. Okay. So commentaries immediately jump on this and said, what's the difference? So if we're going to go back, and since we are Torah scholars here, because we've already crossed the boundary of Kabbalah 101, way back. We're ready. I'm going to quote to you from the 10 Commandments when it talks about the mitzvah, the commandment of honoring your parents. One should honor the father and your father and your mother, in order for me to extend your days on the earth which God gave to you. I'm going to go back to the first part of this mitzvah. I want you to listen very closely, because I'm going to ask you what you know that thing that you have in a book, show me the 10 differences in 2 pictures. Now you see 2 pictures, show me the 10 differences. I want you to listen closely and tell me what are the difference between the verse in Yisro and the verse in today's portion. A person should honor his father and his mother. Remember, honor your father and your mother. Let's go to Kedoshim. A man, his mother and his father should fear. What's the difference? What is it? Mother's first, right? He switched it. In Yisro, at the 10 Commandments, he used who first? Father. Honor your father and your mother. And here he says, fear who goes first? Mother and father. So it makes sense to me, because I feared my mother much worse than my father. That makes perfect sense. But Rashi generally says it's the opposite. You fear your father most. Like, just wait till your dad gets home. Right? Was that the most worst thing that you ever heard? Not me and my family. I waited for my father to come home, because he would, at least I could hide behind him. My mother, on the other hand, forget it. Forget about it. So for me, it was wait till your mother comes home. All of that stuff. But normally Rashi says a person fears the father and honors the mother more. Honors mother more, but fears the father more. So that's why he has to say, when it comes to fear, the Torah was to emphasize, even your mother, Ish Imiv Aviv Taro, one should revere. It doesn't mean really fear. It means revere. I mean, if someone is afraid of their parents, there's something very wrong there. But revering is different than honoring. Because Rashi will explain what revering means. Revering means don't interrupt them. If they're talking, don't insult them. Others. Honoring would be like help them get dressed, serving them, driving them around, taking care of business. So revere and honor are two different things. So revering, the one that you're more afraid of is your father. So therefore the Torah says, Ish imay v'aviv, a man should first revere also his mother and his father. But when it comes to honoring, you honor your mother more than you honor your dad. Who could estimate what a Yiddish mama? Remember that song, My Yiddish Mama? I mean, you hear that song, My Yiddish Mama. Who is like you? There's nothing like a Jewish mother. You honor her, you care for her, you love her. There's no one that cries for you and worries about you, and more than a Yiddish mama. So there in the Ten Commandments, it uses the father first. That you should honor your father as well as your mother, because your mother, you do it naturally. Okay, so that's what Rashi says. Then he goes, okay, so what's the second half of the verse? So why does he include Shabbos? We know already that there's a laws of Shabbos. So Rashi says something very interesting. Even though I told you and I commanded you to honor and revere your parents, but still keep my Shabbos, because my word supersedes their word. So if your dad comes to you and says, you know what, Abba, we're going fishing on Shabbos, we're going up to Lake Kachamahumi, whatever it is, I don't know, Kitchagumi, we're going to go up to Kitchagumi, there's good fishing there, I decided, here on Shabbos, I'm going to take the day off, we're going to go there, we're fishing, I got the rods. What do you say?
No.
I can't go, Dad. Well, why can't you go? It's Shabbos. So, but I'm your dad. It says, it says, honor your father, and I really want to go with you, and I want you to spend time with me. And it's a wonderful thing. I say, I know, Dad, I love you so much, and I care for you so much, and I really want to do it. But the second part of the verse says, you got to keep Shabbos. So I just can't do it. So I'm sorry. Now that's not so easy to do, because you love your parents and you want to make them happy. But that's what it says. Your mother says to you, I got the whole family together and we're going out, to some fancy restaurant on Friday night, and your cousins are here and everybody's going. What do you say? I'm sorry, I can't, because it's Friday night. That's true, not even if it's not Friday night. If your mother says, hey, I got everybody together and we're going out to some fancy restaurant here, whatever it is, on 2nd Street, and you have to say, I'm really sorry, but it's not kosher, I can't come with you. That's why the last part of verse, Ani Hashem Elokeichem, God reiterates that, even though we know that I am God, your God. Why does he have to tell us that all of a sudden? I am God, your God. We know that. He says, because my word supersedes your parents' word. Even though it's important for you to honor and revere your parents, but my word takes precedence over everything. So that's it. Now, but, here comes the kicker. Sometimes we abuse this. There's a way to talk to your parents, even if you disagree with them. Even if your father said to you, I want you to come fishing with me on Saturday morning. There are people that their parents are not religious, but the children did become religious. This is called BT, Balei Tshuva. They become religious, the parents are not religious. So your father, who's a nice guy, he's a good person, but he's not a Shabbos observer, says to you, because for 20 years you've been going fishing, with him, now all of a sudden you discovered God, you became religious now, and now you're keeping Shabbos. There's a way to talk to him and explain to him and say, Dad, I'm really sorry, I can't go. Instead of saying, you know what, Dad, you gave me the worst education in Judaism, you dumped me, you put me in this stupid Hebrew school and taught me nothing, the rabbi was a moron, the teachers were dummies, now I found the path, now I've seen the light, and now I'm religious, and I want nothing to... What have you accomplished? You become religious, and you're a worse person than you were before you were religious. That doesn't bring any honor to anybody by talking like that. Even if it's true, you don't say it. Right. Even if the education he gave you, many parents didn't give their children any Jewish education. But that's not an excuse for lashing out at them and degrading them and ridiculing them. Because that's what happens sometimes when we find our way. Oh, look at me. I discovered the Sinai. I'm the first guy to become. So there's a way to talk to people, even if you disagree with them. Respect. Total respect. And you say to your dad, I'm really sorry I can't come, because I remember clearly, I'm really cutting into time, but I'm going to finish with this, even though I wanted 27, there's 27 more mitzvahs I want to talk about. But she has a question, I know Marcia has a question that she's, but I remember one time I was invited back a while ago, a few years ago, to be on a panel. Orthodox, Reform, Conservative, Reconstructionist Rabbi. And I represented Orthodoxy, Lo Yaleinu. All the other Orthodox rabbis in America immediately put out a petition. He does not represent us. Okay? He does not. And I said that. I do not represent the Orthodox. I represent me personally, Perelmuter. Everything else, because Orthodoxy is so varied between the Satmar, modern Orthodox, and this Orthodox. Anyways, we all spoke, and everybody, and I always felt that I'm at a bit of a disadvantage because the people in the crowd were not Orthodox. I had to defend an Orthodoxy that was being portrayed as being rigid and this. So I made jokes and I showed them, look, we're not rigid. We're just a bunch of idiots trying to find our way, all that stuff.
Did you tell them you were Amish?
I told them every joke that I could think of. I mean, anything would be to keep them off balance in the crowd. Anyways, the thing ends. And then they give out the cookies, like, a nice Jewish event. Now you go for some snacks. There's cake and there's tea and there's this. A woman makes a beeline over to me and says to me, Rabbi, my son became Orthodox. He's crushing our family. He's destroying our family because now he doesn't want to come over. He doesn't want to do this. He doesn't want that. I said, your son's an idiot. I mean, to be honest, I don't care if he became an Orthodox. I don't care whatever he became. Because you become Orthodox doesn't mean that you have to become a nish mensch. You don't have to become an ice mensch, not a person. I said, I'd be happy to talk to your son, and I'd be happy to calm him down a little bit, come and take him down a few rungs, from his ladder. She became one of my closest friends, this lady, after we talked. But that's what sometimes happens. So you have to always remember, no matter how enthusiastic you are, there's always a way to talk to people. Marcy, go ahead, otherwise I'm going to find a lawyer's letter in my box. Because I promised that I'm going to give to I don't know. Go ahead.
3 questions, but they're all related to the intimate relations. So there's no prohibition against cousins marrying each other?
No. Cousins can marry each other.
And if you've married and the husband or wife has passed away, then could you marry their brother or sister?
Yes, you can.
Okay, last one. There was
Actually, it's a mitzvah. One of those is a mitzvah called the Levirate marriage, that if your brother passes away with no children, you could marry, but it depends. You can't marry if your wife is if it's just 2 sisters, you can't marry, so you have to do chalitza. But there is
So I'm glad you said that, because didn't Jacob marry 2 sisters?
Okay, this was before the Torah was given, so everything changed afterwards. Those rules change afterwards. And then of course they try to, but that's the easiest answer to go, that he lived before, but you can't marry 2 sisters. Oh, Jay.
Okay, Rabbi.
Next week we're going to have only those that did not ask a question till no.
I'm asking my first question.
Your first question after Marcy. Okay. Go ahead.
Two questions. One is kind of general. I picture, as we do, seeing a big cinema of the Ten Commandments thing, I picture in my mind a movie of the turbaned high priest and all. Has anyone with Chabad or anyone else recreated that in visuals?
Sure. There are books that have. It's called Hamishkan. I think I have it at home. It's called The Sanctuary, and it's gone through the book, the whole Torah, and has created all of the vessels in the Mishkan, and the people too. The best is if you ever go to Israel and you go to visit the wall, right next to the wall, there's a virtual movie for about 12 or 14 minutes of how it looked at when people came there. And it's of course, it's all built upon AI now, like how they looked and how the high priest, yes.
Well, yeah, that reminds me of being in London. If everyone goes to London, you go up in the highest building, they have, looking down the Thames, they have visually how it looked going back in the centuries.
Right. So you have that, and you go that online too. You can go online.
The second thing I want to tell you is,
yes,
when you said about the parents raising you when you become Orthodox, you say, oh, you sent me to Hebrew and okay, that is my truth as to what my parents did to me in the effect. Their truth is different. You should not question their truth. And that is, my truth is I'm Orthodox now, and that. But you honor their attempts and you honor their flaws and everything. You say, I honor my parents, but you don't turn back on them, as you said.
You can't.
And
you can't.
That's a beautiful thing. It's like, it is what it is, and your truth is your truth.
Yeah, everybody, listen, I want to believe that everyone did the best that they possibly could have done. Now, I have a certain Weltanschauung. I have a worldview that come from a different spot than a lot of people, because I come from this small enclave of, it was an Orthodox little community in Montreal that I grew up in, and it was heavily, geared towards study and Torah and Torah and Torah and Torah, all of that stuff. So in my mind, everybody should have been doing that. When I came out of seminary, I was like, I'm going to change the American Jewish culture. Yeah. Till I found out you can't even change yourself. Forget about American Jewish culture. You can't come yourself. So I do have one way of looking that I think will keep the Jewish people strong and safe, and and all of that stuff. But there's a certain message that we need to go out there and give out. Anger and negativity and condemnation never works. Never works, because everybody had their own reasons and purpose of the upbringing wherever they came from, and there were a lot of people that didn't give their children any Jewish education, none. I mean, whatever reason, and now all of a sudden this guy is now very religious and this and that. Okay, I'm glad for you. I'm very happy, and believe me, I'm thrilled when more people become Orthodox. It's great. I mean, I'm never denying that truth. That's for sure. But I've always said that, the Torah also has this concept of respect, of kabed es avicha. One of the things, if you've noticed, in the mitzvah of honoring parents, it does not say about loving your parents. It does not say you have to love your parents. It doesn't say obey your parents. It says you should honor and revere them, which is a very interesting thing, because we talked about this a number of different times, about there are people that should not have been parents. For all intents and purposes, they should have been parents. The funny thing is, everything in America that you buy comes now with instructions. The smallest little thing that you buy, we're buying things for the new Shul. It has a paper towel holder. A paper towel holder, a piece of plastic, has instructions of how to fill it. Okay? Step 1, open it up. Okay, good. Step 2, insert the thing. Step 3, lower it. Step 4, pick it up. Okay? Everything comes, except one thing in America doesn't come with instructions. Babies. A child, when it comes out, I was waiting when Chayleia was born for the book of how to raise the kid, of the rules and regulations. Gornish, nothing, zero, zilch, FS, nothing. How? You put together a little bicycle, you put together a toaster, you plug it in, anything has instructions with a warranty. This comes with nothing, which tells you that some people are better off not doing this. Even though I'm a big proponent of having children, you should have as many as God gives you. But here, some people should say to themselves, I'm better off, being celibate. Congratulations, Mazdov, on a good choice that you took, But they insist on having children, and they're horrible parents, and they bring up horrible children, because that's what can happen. Not always. But in a dysfunctional family is going to breed dysfunction, So therefore, when people sit in my office and say, my mother was not a mother. My mother was not a mother. A normal mother doesn't do the things that my mother did. I say to them, doesn't say you have to love them, but it says you have to respect them. That's it. You have a certain relationship with them. Goodbye. Have a good day. See you later. See you never. See you whenever it is. But those two things you have to be able to keep in mind always and at all times. And then you try to live a good life, but it's not always easy, as I said. But the key is that every day we wake up, we have a new opportunity to do something exceptional. So let's go out there and do it. All right? Let's go. All right.